I never imagined that at my age, a single glance from a young man could leave me lying awake at night. It probably sounds silly, but that morning I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the aging woman looking back at me. Not because I thought I was unattractive, but because I didn't recognize her anymore. I'm Maggie Walker. I'm 67 and live in the southern suburbs of Denver. I've been divorced for over a decade now. My husband, Frank, left me for someone nearly 30 years younger. The early days were hard, but I eventually adjusted, eating breakfast alone, watching the news in silence, and falling asleep with my cat, Oliver, curled next to me on the pillow. My daughter, who lives in Florida, sends pictures of her kids now and then with a note that says, "I'll call you this weekend. Weekends often pass without a call." The only grandchild I feel close to is Ethan, my son's only boy, now in college out in Boston. He texts sometimes, a photo of a new dish, or just a message like, "Grandma, I miss your apple pie." Every time I read that, something warm and soft unfolds in my chest. This time, the message was different. He said he was coming to visit. "Grandma, I'm flying in Thursday. Booked my ticket." From that moment on, I started preparing, washed the glasses I hadn't used since last Christmas, scrubbed the windows, lit Ethan's favorite candles, vanilla and cinnamon. I even made the old casserole Frank always hated, but Ethan adored as a child. When the doorbell rang around noon, I gave myself one last glance in the mirror, straightened my sweater, and brushed the stray hair from my face. I opened the door, smiling, and there he was, Ethan, tall and a little scruffy, a heavy backpack slung over his shoulder. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood someone else, thin, tall, with dark skin and a quiet gaze. His hair was pulled back in a bun. He looked a little unsure of himself, almost out of place. "Grandma," Ethan said, his voice tinged with hesitation. "This is Jordan, my roommate. He didn't have anywhere to go this summer. I hope it's okay." Jordan gave me a slight smile, not rude, but cautious, the kind of smile that expects rejection. I nearly asked why Ethan hadn't told me in advance. I nearly said I wasn't prepared, but instead I stepped aside and said, "Of course. You two come in." Ethan entered like it was still his home, because it was. Jordan followed, so softly that I barely heard his steps on the wooden floor. I watched him, not judging, just curious. Jordan wasn't the typical college kid. He was polite, calm, and carried a quiet kind of sadness in his eyes. "He likes the quiet," Ethan said as we sat down. "But you'll like him. Jordan makes better salads than me." "Not a high bar," I teased. "You used to make salad with mayonnaise, remember?" Jordan chuckled, low and brief, as if afraid to break the stillness of the house. I served dinner as though I were hosting someone important. Jordan nodded appreciatively as I handed him a bowl of stew. Our hands brushed, barely, but my body froze for the tiniest second. What surprised me wasn't the touch. It was the way he looked at me after. It wasn't the glance of a 20-year-old toward his friend's grandmother. It was direct, unflinching, like he was seeing me, really seeing me. Not my silver hair, not my worn skin, but the woman hidden under the soft cardigan. The loneliness, the ache to matter. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Ethan snored lightly in his old room. Jordan was in the living room. I could hear his slippers across the floorboards. I didn't dare leave the room. I just lay there, eyes open in the dark, wondering, why did that one look unsettle me so deeply? The next morning, I was up early as usual. Sunlight poured gently across the wooden table. I brewed coffee, turned on the radio, the familiar voice of the host chatting like an old friend. I had just pulled fresh bread from the oven when I heard the faintest footsteps. Jordan stood at the kitchen doorway, wearing a simple white t-shirt, his hair still damp and tied back loosely. He held a small book in one hand. When our eyes met, he gave a gentle, slightly sheepish smile, like he knew he wasn't supposed to be the first one awake in someone else's home. "I'm used to early mornings," he said, voice still rough from sleep. "Good," I replied, pouring him a second cup. "This house needs someone to talk to in the morning. Oliver just meows." He laughed softly. I slid the coffee toward him. Black, no sugar, no cream. His eyes widened slightly. "That's my favorite." "Not many people under 30 like black coffee," I said with a smile. "Frank, my ex, called it morning poison. Maybe because he never wanted to wake up that much." Jordan sipped quietly. His reply wasn't just polite, it was thoughtful. He didn't just listen. He tuned into the feelings behind words. We sat in companionable silence for a while. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. Ethan woke around noon, hair tousled, eyes half-lidded, same drowsy tone he had as a baby. He groaned at the smell of bacon, then wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You're still the best cook," he mumbled into my shoulder. I laughed, but noticed Jordan watching. His smile was soft, not distant, not jealous, but wistful. And something in me ached gently at the sight. The day unfolded in a sweet, familiar rhythm. Ethan took Jordan on a walk through the neighborhood, showed him Aunt Ruth's house, the one who always overshares, the old oak tree where the kids played, the garden corner where Frank grew jalapenos no one could eat. In the afternoon, I heard them laughing in the yard. I stepped onto the porch, iced tea in hand, and saw Jordan mowing the lawn while Ethan held a giant ball of grass like a trophy. They were both sweaty and laughing, wild and young. "You two look like an energy drink commercial," I called. They doubled over, laughing harder. "We're starting a YouTube gardening channel," Ethan said. "What's it called?" I asked, shielding my eyes. Jordan set the mower down, looked at me and said, "Mowing with strangers." I laughed, and just like that, I felt 20 years younger, as if the yard was once again alive, with sunlight, noise, joy. That evening, we had a simple dinner. Afterward, we curled up to watch Sleepless in Seattle. Ethan fell asleep halfway through, his head resting on my shoulder. Jordan stayed upright, eyes fixed on the screen, but I saw him gently pull the blanket over Ethan's legs. It was a small gesture, quiet and tender. No performance, just care. When the movie ended and I got up to switch off the lights, Jordan was still sitting there. "Old movie," he said with a small smile. "But still good," he said softly. "Some things don't need to be new to touch people," I replied. Jordan looked at me just for a second, but I felt something move in my chest. This time, I went straight to my room without looking back. The next morning, I woke up feeling strange, not tired, not anxious, but excited. I put on a pale green dress, the kind I thought was too light for my age, combed my hair and put on some lipstick. I didn't do it for anyone else. I did it for me. I wanted to feel alive when I walked into the kitchen. Jordan was sitting at the table reading. He looked up, taken aback, just for a split second. "But I saw it. You look so springy," he said. I laughed, my heart pounding. "Thanks. It's been a long time since spring on the third day." I invited the two of us to the local farmer's market. Ethan declined lazily, so Jordan and I drove downtown. We talked about movies, books, music. There was no awkward silence. Jordan picked out a bouquet of lavender and asked, "Do you like this scent?" "I like scents that remind me of things I've forgotten," I said. He looked at me, nodded, and said, "I understand." And I knew somehow that he did that afternoon as I was watering the plants. Jordan came over and handed me a small photo frame. "I found this in the garage. I wonder if it's yours." I looked at it. It was a picture of Ethan and me when he was 5 at a picnic. I couldn't remember when I'd lost it. I held the frame, trying to keep my voice even. "Thanks. It's a piece of the puzzle." I thought I'd lost. Jordan just nodded, then turned away. But I couldn't take my eyes off his back at that moment. 3 days, 3 mornings, 3 looks. A few small words. I couldn't and didn't want to define this feeling. But I knew one thing for sure. In a house where it had been just me and the cats meowing for so long, Jordan's presence was awakening parts of me that I thought were dead. The 4th day, the wind was blowing, the wind of early autumn, not cold enough to wear a jacket, but enough to make one feel cold. I stood in the kitchen, arranging the vegetables I had just bought in an old bamboo basket, when I heard the back door open slightly. Jordan walked in, holding a bunch of carrots with dirt on them. The light streaming through the window behind him made everything slow down a beat. "I forgot to wash these," he said, holding out the carrots like a contrite schoolboy. His hands were tanned, his nails clean but slightly frayed. Hands that had worked, not just typed. I took them, thanked him, and put the carrots in the sink. When I rolled up my sleeves, Jordan didn't leave, but stood, leaning lightly against the edge of the table. "You seem to like doing things the old-fashioned way," he said, looking around the kitchen. The glass spice jars, the lace tablecloth, the old wall clock. "Old doesn't mean outdated," I said, smiling. "It's just, I've lived with these things long enough to trust them." Jordan nodded, a nod of genuine agreement. Not a polite one. Somehow, I felt like I wanted to say more, like something inside me needed to be opened. Just like I thought, Frank, my ex was the one thing I could trust with my whole life. I regretted it after I said it. I shouldn't have shared too much. But Jordan didn't ask, didn't pry. Just whispered, "Does it hurt when the thing you trust the most is the thing that hurts you the most?" I looked at him for the first time. I didn't see a young man. I saw a soul older than his years, who had been left behind, who had lost faith. "It hurts so much that I can't even trust myself," I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the silence of 2 people standing in front of a mirror, each seeing themselves reflected in the other. That evening, Ethan invited his friends to go out for a beer at the sports bar. I didn't forbid it. I knew he needed some time alone. When he left, Jordan was on the back porch reading. I made 2 cups of hot cocoa, walked out, and placed one beside him. "Not coffee?" Jordan asked, smiling a little. "Coffee is for the morning. I need something lighter tonight," I said, sitting down on the chair next to him. We sat quietly. The wind blew softly through our shirts. The scent of lavender from the flower beds filled the air. "I miss my mom," Jordan said suddenly. I didn't answer. I just listened. She used to have a bottle of this perfume. I remember it clearly. The last time I smelled it was the night she left. My heart clenched. He was still looking out into the garden. Not at me. My dad didn't say anything, just served breakfast the next morning as if nothing had happened, and that was it. I put my hand on the armrest of the chair, very close to his, not touching, just enough to feel the distance. I've learned not to ask anything of anyone, but sometimes I get tired. His voice trailed off. I turned to look at him. His face was tilted, the yellow light reflecting off his cheeks. His eyes were wet, not crying, but on the verge of tears. I wanted to reach out to touch his shoulder, his hand, but I didn't. I just whispered, "No one should live without an expectation of return." "Jordan?" He turned, looked at me. That look again made me tremble, not because he was so young. It was because it had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that. I lay awake all night. My body wouldn't stay still. My hand wanted to text someone, call someone, but no one was there. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of chamomile tea on the table. Jordan had left an old leather notebook. I didn't intend to read it, just set it aside, but a piece of paper fell out, handwritten. The ink smudged a bit. I wonder if anyone would ever wait for me at the door, even once I sat down. My hands, shaking, tears welling up in my eyes, because I understood I had written the exact same thing in my diary. 30 years ago, after an argument with Frank, I had also thought, does anyone really want me to come home? Or am I just someone who shows up to do the housework? Cook and then disappears behind the door? I put the paper back, gently closed the notebook. I said nothing, but inside, a door had just opened. Not just to Jordan, but to a part of myself, that I had buried for too long. On the 5th day, it was raining lightly. The house was unusually quiet, as if every sound had been softened by the moisture outside. Ethan had been out since morning, saying he was meeting some old friends and might be back late. I didn't ask too much. I knew he needed space, and I was no longer the one who had the right to ask too much. Jordan had been in his room all morning, the door ajar, jazz music playing quietly. I walked by, pausing for a moment. He was sitting on the floor, his laptop on a low table, a notebook beside him, and a steaming cup of coffee. Jordan looked up, his eyes glancing at me. "Are you working on something?" I asked quietly. "Yes, an essay on the corruption of Baldwin." I nodded. "He writes with truth and blood," Jordan said, and smiled softly. I didn't answer. I just felt something like admiration welling up inside me. Not many young people say things like that night. I made stew and garlic toast. Jordan helped clear the table when I turned to get a glass. He was standing too close. My hand brushed his, a fleeting touch, but I felt my heart skip a beat. Jordan flinched, then smiled. I pretended nothing happened, but when I turned away, I felt my cheeks heat up after dinner. It was still raining. Ethan texted that he was staying over at a friend's house. I said goodnight, then sat on the sofa holding an old novel that I couldn't read. My eyes wandered to the window where the raindrops traced slow lines like memories flowing back. Jordan emerged from the room holding 2 cups of hot tea. "I think Grandma needs this," he said. I smiled, taking them. I don't know when I let him call me that. We sat watching an old movie in the mood for love that not many young people like. But Jordan silently watched every frame as if he were living it. When the movie reached the part where the 2 main characters passed each other in the rain, no one stopped, just a silent gaze. I saw Jordan let out a soft breath. "I used to think love was something that needed to be said," he whispered. "But maybe sometimes silence hurts more than rejection." I didn't know what to say. I just felt my chest tighten. A small thunderclap broke out somewhere in the distance. I jumped slightly, just a natural reflex, and leaned forward unconsciously. My shoulder touched Jordan's arm. He turned to look at me, didn't move, didn't avoid. We sat like that close together for almost a minute. I could feel the warmth of his young body, the scent of soap wafting from his collar. My hand still held the cup of tea, but my fingers had begun to tremble slightly. Jordan tilted his head slightly. His eyes seemed to be asking something, not forcing, not rushing, just a silent request. I don't know what made me do it. Loneliness, longing, or just a moment of weakness. But I didn't move away. He put his hand on mine very gently, as if afraid of breaking something fragile inside me. I didn't pull my hand away. I left it there. We sat like that for a long time. No talking, no moving, just the sound of the rain, the sound of the movie, and 2 heartbeats mingling in a wordless place. I wanted to say something, a warning, a refusal, something to keep morals, reason distance. But what I said was, "Are you cold?" Jordan shook his head slightly, then smiled a sad smile. "No, I feel safe when the movie ended." I stood up first. I put the glass down on the table, turned away, not looking at him. "Good night, Jordan." I didn't wait for an answer in the bedroom. I closed the door, leaned against the wall, and closed my eyes for a long time. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew for the first time in years I had been touched, not by hands, but by presence. The next morning, the sky cleared after the rain. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, creating long golden streaks on the wooden floor. The aroma of coffee wafted through the quiet space as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. But I knew, and I was sure Jordan knew too. We didn't mention sitting close together, holding hands, making eye contact. Everything was back to normal, to the point of being abnormal. Ethan returned in the afternoon, bringing laughter and a few beers from a school party. The house was filled with noise again, but I felt strangely unfamiliar with that familiar rhythm. It was like someone had changed the interior design of my heart. The old things were still there, but no longer in their right places when Ethan went out to play basketball with his friends. I took 2 cups of cocoa to the back porch. Jordan was sitting there, a notebook on her knees, a pencil in her hand, her gaze far away. I sat down beside him, and there was a moment of silence before I said, "Some things can't be kept in a book, right?" Jordan smiled. He put down his pen, turned his cup of cocoa in his hand, and asked, "Have you ever wanted to disappear?" I paused. The question, unannounced, unprompted, was like a light stab to my mind. "Yes," I said, looking toward the maple tree at the end of the garden, many times. Especially when I was 52 and I found out Frank had been seeing someone else 3 years ago. Jordan didn't interrupt. He sat still, listening, not judging. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was just quiet. I set the table, like I always did. I baked cookies, like I always did that night. I made 2 cups of cocoa, like I always did, and left one on the kitchen counter, but no one drank it. I paused, not because of emotion, but because something stuck in my throat like a word that had not been fully said since years ago. I used to think if I disappeared, then maybe it would be easier. No one would have to wait for me. No one would have to see me weak. Jordan nodded slightly. "But you didn't disappear." I laughed. "No, because my daughter called in the middle of the night to ask how to fix a burnt roast chicken." We both laughed, a short laugh, not a big one, but enough to clear some of the haze in my heart from then on. I said, "I chose to live not because I was strong, but because if I didn't live, who would bake cookies for Ethan, who would cut the lavender every morning, who would listen to the radio and remember the words the host said in '98. Jordan tilted his head, looking at me for a long time. "Do you think I'm strong?" he asked suddenly. "No," I replied after a moment of silence. "I think you're the one who survived. That seemed to stop Jordan." Jordan looked down at his hands. His fingers were clasped together, as if holding something together so that it wouldn't fall apart. I used to think if I disappeared, no one would notice. He spoke slowly, evenly, as if each word had to be exhaled through a thin layer of memory. When my mother left, I sat by the window for 3 days every night. I thought tomorrow she'll be back. Maybe she just went to buy some cake, or got lost, or needed time. Jordan swallowed, then continued. But on the 4th day, my father cleaned out her closet. He didn't say anything. He just said, "Put away all that girly stuff, don't cry." I held my breath, not because what he said was so unexpected. It was because I'd heard the exact same words, but from my mother. Don't be weak, don't cry. Women have to endure. I learned not to need anyone, Jordan said, his voice low. I stayed in the dorms all year, worked in the library, didn't go to parties, didn't hang out with anyone, didn't text home. "Do you ever feel like you're fading?" I asked softly. He turned to me, nodding slowly, fading in crowds, fading in mirrors. Sometimes I thought the person in the mirror wasn't me. That made me freeze. I'd felt that way too, not recognizing myself anymore. Like I was just a supporting character in someone else's life. I reached out, without hesitation. This time, I placed my hand lightly on the back of his hand. "But you're still here," I said gently. "Still sitting here. Someone's pouring you cocoa, right?" Jordan laughed very softly, and this time something cracked in the sound for the first time. "I felt like I wasn't fading," he said. The wind blew as light as a touch on the neck. Jordan turned away, was silent for a moment, then continued. "I know you're much older than me. I know things are strange, but no one has ever listened to me like you." I withdrew my hand, placed it on my chest. My heart was pounding. "You don't need to explain," I said softly. "I've never had anyone listen to me without wanting to change me." We looked at each other, this time. There was no shyness, no boundaries, just 2 souls, ageless, seeking refuge in each other, not to hide, but to understand. We could still be seen. That moment needed no words, no promises. It just existed, and I knew that no matter what happened next, whether this relationship ended quietly or flared up like fire, this moment was real. I began to dread the late afternoons, Not because it got dark earlier. Not because the early fall wind began to carry a paper-thin chill. But because of those twilight hours, when Ethan was still out, the house was quiet, and I found myself longing for Jordan to come into the kitchen just to ask what I was doing, to hand me the spice jar from the high shelf, or simply to stand there, leaning against the table, hands in pockets, eyes following me unabashedly. As if in his world, I was the still point, and I began to need that gaze. One evening, we watched Before Sunrise again. Ethan fell asleep early, leaving us sitting in the dark, the screen flickering a faint blue light. When the film got to the part where the two characters were walking along the Danube discussing love and death, Jordan whispered, "I've wanted to have a conversation with someone like that all night." "I do," I said, half joking. Jordan turned to me, "But usually people just want to talk all night with someone they don't want to leave." I didn't answer. My heart was pounding. Part of me wanted to push it away. Part of me wanted to stay. I sat still, letting the feeling take over my body, like I was sitting on the edge of a cliff, not sure if I was going to jump. Jordan moved a little closer. The space between our shoulders almost disappeared. He put his arm on the back of the chair behind me, not touching, but enough for me to feel the warmth lingering on the back of my neck. "Maggie," Jordan whispered, "if I told you I liked you, would you think I was crazy?" I swallowed. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part, the part that still aches every night I go to bed alone, wants to cry. "I think you're lost," I say, my voice light as air. Maybe he admits, but I don't want to leave where I am. For the first time, I feel like the door, open or close. The power is in my hands. No one is forcing me. No one is pulling me in. Just, I'm standing there, my hand on the knob, and my heart is in turmoil. The next morning, I don't go to the kitchen. I lie in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the times I've come close to making mistakes and pulled back. But this doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like a longing, something I've lost inside myself for a long time. I hear Jordan downstairs, the clink of glasses, the radio he's playing, the same show I listen to every morning. It makes me smile when I step down. He turned his eyes bright, as if he had been waiting. "I've got coffee for you," Jordan said, his voice casual, as if nothing had happened the night before. "Thanks, we didn't speak again, we didn't touch." But every glance, every good morning was a silent agreement that the line between us was thinning, and neither of us was sure enough to want to keep it that day. It rained again. I sat in my small study by the window, opening a long-forgotten notebook. The blank pages confused me. I used to write a few lines a day to keep things that no one needed to know. But today, I couldn't write anything. I couldn't wrap these mixed feelings into words. I wrote only one line, then hesitated. If age is a limit, then who sets the boundaries? I closed the notebook immediately after late in the afternoon. Jordan brought in an old book I'd mentioned before, Kate Chopin's The Awakening. He'd found it in the garage when he was going through boxes of old books. She said she read it when she got divorced, he reminded me. I took it and flipped through a few pages. The lines were underlined. The ink smudged from tears. I felt like Edna drowned by expectation, then drowned again by desire. "But she didn't die," Jordan said. I looked up at him, the words so simple yet so keyed. I knew he was talking about me and about him too. That night, I dabbed some perfume behind my ears, something I hadn't done in a long time. I wore a long burgundy nightgown with a lace collar, not revealing, but soft, feminine. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was because I missed feeling like a woman. Not just grandma. Divorce. A lonely middle-aged woman. Jordan was reading in the living room when I came out about to go to the kitchen to get some water. He looked up, his eyes momentarily frozen. I started to turn away, but he called softly. "Maggie." I stopped, didn't turn. "Can you sit with me for a while?" His voice was as soft as a breath, as if afraid to break something fragile hanging between us. I turned back and sat down on the chair next to him. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We were just quietly together. After a while, Jordan reached out very slowly and placed his hand on mine. This time, I didn't pull away. He leaned toward me so close that I could feel his warm breath on my cheek. "Do you want to?" he whispered, not finishing his sentence. I looked up at him. I saw youth in his eyes, desire, but also respect waiting, and most importantly, no possession. I touched his cheek lightly. The touch was soft as a petal trembling like the early spring breeze. Then I whispered, "Not tonight." Jordan nodded slightly, withdrew his hand, not angry, not forcing. He just said, "Thanks for not pushing me away." I stood up and walked to my room, placing my hand on my heart where the beat seemed to have broken into a new level. I closed the door, wondering, did I just cross the line, or was I standing on the edge of it? I went to the market early this morning. The air smelled of fresh sunshine, moist, and still smelled of last night's rain. I packed a few carrots, a bunch of basil, and a jar of fresh strawberry jam into a cloth bag. I was about to turn around when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Maggie, how many years has it been?" It was Barbara. Her hair was still curled like a crow's nest, her eyes still darting like tops, the kind of person who knew all the news in town, even the ones that weren't necessarily true. I smiled politely. "I heard your nephew is back, and he's brought a friend with him," she said, glancing at my shopping cart, as if doing a visual inventory. "Yeah, Ethan's back for the summer." "He brought a classmate," I replied, keeping my voice even. "That guy Jordan, right?" She emphasized the name, then curled her lips. "I see he's been helping you water the plants, mow the lawn lately. He's been really nice, but a little young." "Huh?" I paused for a second. I don't know if it was the sarcasm in her tone, or because I knew I had let others see something I shouldn't. I just smiled faintly and retreated. But that sentence, "a little young, huh?" kept ringing in my ears like a stain that wouldn't wash off that afternoon. I stood in the kitchen, wiping down cups. Ethan came back from somewhere, looking strange. He walked in quickly, holding his phone toward me without saying anything. On the screen was a post in a neighborhood group intergenerational friendship or something. Behind the wooden fence number 23 below. It was a blurry photo. Jordan and I on the back porch chair, our hands close together, our eyes tilted under the yellow light. I felt like someone had thrown a rock at my chest. Cold, stunned, breathless. "Ma'am?" Ethan said, his voice. "What is this about?" I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't expect it. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice calm. You and Jordan, we had time to talk, but not like you thought." "What do you mean?" His voice softened, but his eyes were still filled with confusion. I looked at my daughter's son, the one I'd rocked to sleep so many nights while he was teething. Who was now asking me questions as if I were someone else? Someone to be suspicious of. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan? But people will think you're wrong." I smiled bitterly because I'm too old to be loved without judgment. Ethan didn't answer. He turned away a little and sat down in his chair, his face downcast. I walked over. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Love isn't always like it's in books, and not everything has a name. You didn't lie to anyone. You didn't pull Jordan close." Ethan looked at me. His eyes softened, but there was a quiet disappointment in them. "I trust you, but I don't know if I trust Jordan anymore." I nodded. "You understand?" That night, Jordan knocked on my door. He stood in the doorway, the yellow light illuminating his young face, full of worry. "I'm sorry," he said, not daring to look at me. "I don't blame you," I said. "I didn't want you to get hurt by what I did." I smiled a tired smile. "It's because you didn't want me to get hurt that we're in the most uncomfortable place." Jordan took a step forward. Ethan looks at me like a stranger. "He needs time," I said more to myself. We stood in the darkness like nameless shadows. I put my hand on the doorframe, looking at Jordan for a long time. "Do you regret it?" I asked. Jordan shook his head no, but I'm afraid I'll make her regret it. I didn't answer. I just said, "It's going to rain tomorrow. You should go to bed early," and I closed the door very slowly. But my heart was still open, and I knew from that moment on that this was no longer about me. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. After the news broke, the house was unusually quiet. Not because the sounds had disappeared, but because Ethan Jordan, were choosing to say less, as if saying anything more would shatter everything into 100 pieces that could never be put back together. I avoided looking at Jordan for too long. Not because I hated him, quite the opposite. I was afraid that if I looked at him, I'd see that look again. The look of someone who had never been loved in a tender, unconditional way, and I knew I was starved for that love too. I found myself starting to back away that afternoon when Ethan went out for a walk. Jordan knocked on my door. I knew he would come. Something about the afternoon, light, dim, yellow, bleak, made me know something was about to end. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked. I nodded, inviting him in. Jordan walked in and sat down on the little chair by the bookcase. He wasn't the same kid who'd been listening to me a few weeks ago. There was a weariness in his shoulders, in his eyes, and in his silence. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "about what happened, about her. About myself." I didn't interrupt. I let him talk, to be honest. I wasn't sure what I wanted at first. All I knew was that she was the first person who made me feel like I could stay. I closed my eyes for a second. The words were like a soft scratch. And then I started wanting more. Not money. Not help, her presence, her eyes, her voice, her hand on my shoulder. "I thought I was just needing comfort," Jordan continued. "But there were times when I thought about using it to stay for a long time, lean on her." I turned, looking at him for a long moment. "And have you?" Jordan shook his head. "No, I can't, because the closer I am to her, the less I want to be someone who makes her doubt herself." I felt tears touch my eyes. They didn't fall, just a little smudge at the corner. "Thank you for being honest," I said, my voice light. "I think I need to be honest too." I stood up, poured 2 cups of tea, setting one in front of him. I sat down beside him, not across from him, not far away, just beside him. I thought I could control everything I began, that I was mature enough to know my limits, but you made me see one thing clearly. I was still vulnerable. Still yearning to be touched, like a woman who had never lived fully. Jordan looked at me, not interrupting, and that scared me. I continued, "Not afraid of you, afraid of myself, afraid that I might lose my mind just because someone said my name with a non-judgmental look." "You're not wrong," Jordan said. Maybe I smiled, but society doesn't think so, and I'm not sure I'm strong enough to fight it again. We sat in silence. The tea had gone cold. I heard the ticking of the clock, a sound that was rarely noticed, but today it rang out like a stick to the heart. "I'll go," Jordan said finally. I turned. "No rush. I don't want to cut any deeper," he said. "If this keeps up, one of us will be hurt forever." I let out a breath, a soft sigh of surrender. "We've come too far to be strangers again," I said, "but not far enough to be anything," Jordan added. I nodded, then after a pause, I placed my hand on the back of his hand one last time. "You came into my life as an uninvited variable, but so precisely that it made me realize how I had lived all this time." Jordan took my hand, not hard, not weak, just enough to hold the warmth for a few more seconds, and she made me want to be a better man, not for her sake, but to be worthy of that look. Just once. I pulled my hand back, smiled a sad smile, like the autumn nights that no one waited for. "Then don't forget me," I said. "Never," he replied. I didn't see Jordan off at the airport. He understood. I understood. No one needed a final hug in public to confirm anything. What we had said, enough had lived enough. I just stood at the door watching him drag his small suitcase across the stone walkway past the lavender bed they had tended. No promises. No, I'll be back. No, wait for me. Just a glance back over my shoulder. Soft long enough to exhale a soundless goodbye. The gate closed behind him. I turned back, my hand brushing the edge of the table where the circular mark of his teacup was still there. Every morning, the days that followed passed quietly. Ethan left a few weeks later to do an internship in another state. The house became quiet, as if I didn't even dare to make a sound. Once when I was watering, Barbara stopped by pretending to ask how I was doing, then said half-jokingly, "I heard that student left." "That's true. Young people, you can't keep him forever." I just smiled, not harshly, not explaining. Because I know not all relationships are meant to be kept. There are people who come into our lives like a breeze through a summer window. Light warm, and then leave, but the fragrance remains. I don't know how you feel about coming to the end of this story with me. Maybe you find it wrong, maybe you find it sad, but if there is a moment that makes you stop and ask yourself, have I ever lived fully with my emotions? Then perhaps we have truly met, not in real life, but in the things we dare not say. Thank you for listening to me all the way to this point. If you want to continue listening to stories that seem unexpected but are full of truth, subscribe to the channel.